everybody. Quick question. Wanted to ask, just kind of get a better sense of the audience. How many, if it's by a show of hands, how many of you are government policymakers, regulators? Okay. How many of you are entrepreneurs? Okay. How many of you are investors? Would it be venture capital, corporate, angel investors? Okay, great. So that's helpful. I want to just kind of talk about kind of our view that we've been working on for the last 4 years around the fact that crowdfunding is not alternative finance, it's modern finance. And this is it's where we sort of see this as, we would say, the tip of the spear, the beginning of the radical reshaping of the private capital markets. So in the late 1990s, early 2000s, the public capital markets moved online. And that really, for all the typical reasons you'd expect, lower costs, increased liquidity, increased velocity of deals. And in the United States, at least with the passage of the Jobs Act, that's when we began to see the movement of online, of the private markets moving online. So we really believe that crowdfunding and other forms of modern finance really unlock the opportunity for innovation. There's brilliant people everywhere in the world, and why you have to live in London, San Francisco, New York, or a few other cities around the world to get capital is stupid. And so we think that there's better ways of doing that, and crowdfunding is the first one of those ways, the first one of those ways to unlock that opportunity. Where I come into this story, I'm an entrepreneur, a tech entrepreneur myself, been living and working in San Francisco since 1998. I and one of my friends from business school created the regulatory framework that became the crowdfunding language in the Jobs Act. We did it, we sort of started the conversation at a friend's wedding. That turned into a lot of work, and over the course of 460 days, our policy proposal went from an idea with a couple of guys on a blog to being at the Rose Garden of the White House to watch President Obama sign the Jobs Act into law in April of 2012. Since that time, we've now worked in 41 countries around the world to try to help drive this movement forward, and also from a policy perspective and an investment perspective. These numbers are pretty interesting. This is out of the University of Cambridge. Between 2014 and 2015, the global crowdfunding market increased 212%. And when I say crowdfunding, I mean equity crowdfunding, debt crowdfunding or peer-to-peer loans, real estate crowdfunding, and as well as rewards-based crowdfunding, which are things like Kickstarter or Indiegogo. The market is anticipated to grow again. Probably it'll be well over $300 billion this year. And so it's a rapidly growing market. But interestingly enough, the media hasn't caught on yet. We talk in the media and the press and are interviewed lots of places, but the media's not catching on to this. They're seeing this as a thing that's happening in the corner of finance, an acute opportunity, and something that happens for kids in school or people in nonprofits. But it's actually much bigger than that. So it turns out that actually Goldman Sachs agrees. Last year, Goldman issued a report called The Future of Finance. And they stated that their belief is that this is the socialization of finance. Socialization in finance is equity crowdfunding, debt crowdfunding, real estate crowdfunding, and robo-advising. And those factors will create a $4.7 trillion market opportunity. And I find that when talking with investors, when you have a number that begins with a T, they tend to pay more attention. And we did some work with the World Bank looking at this strictly in the developing economies, which I think there's a massive opportunity in developing economies for this. And what we found was that we conservatively estimated back in 2013 this would be a $100 billion opportunity. I think probably in the next 2 years we thought that'd be a 10-year, takes 10 years to get there. What we've seen is that that's going to happen much faster. That development will happen probably in the next 2 years. Will exceed $100 billion in crowdfunding in developing economies alone. So kind of how are these markets evolving? The UK is sort of in the lead, followed by the rest of the EU, the US, Asia, Latin America. I think Asia will soon overtake the United States in its utilization of crowdfunding. The reason being is that they don't have a lot of the infrastructure the kind of financial infrastructure that's in place in the US and other developed markets, where they can go ahead and just, it's sort of like the example that's often used of cell phones. When cell phones came to China, people stopped caring about getting a landline. They just went right to mobile. And really we've seen that play out in the finance space as well. So how do we think about investing in this space, because we really see there being a huge investment opportunity in this space and are investing ourselves. And we break it down into 5 sectors. We think, first of all, there's the platforms, the crowdfunding platforms themselves, and the secondary markets. Second, there are trust and transparency tools. I mean, when you think about the public markets, how do they expand? They expand because you have things like escrow services, and title, and transfer, and due diligence, and legal, and accounting, investor relations. All of those sorts of services, they're created today for public markets and billion-dollar companies. And how do you create scaled-down, more mobile, more actionable versions of those things for the private markets? Third is data and analytics tools. How do we compare apples to oranges? How do we know how to evaluate a deal in Brussels versus a deal in Amsterdam versus a deal in Tokyo? And those sorts of data and analytics services are being created through data standards and other kinds of things to enable people to understand what's happening globally from a database perspective, but also to be able to evaluate deals and understand deal terms globally. Fourth is money transfer in the blockchain. This is a really fascinating part of the system. We're seeing obviously lots of movement in the blockchain for lots of different things, but moving money cross-border will certainly be one of those opportunities. I mean, either the UK or China will have the first sovereign virtual currency available in the world. And that'll happen probably in the next 12 to 18 months. And so with that will come a rush of other countries thinking about how they're going to manage virtual sovereign currency. And I think that we don't have, every country we go to and when we work is talking about how they can move money more efficiently, how they can solicit cross-border investments. And certainly the way of cross-border capital flows today is far too outdated and far too slow and expensive. And then finally is the white space opportunities. And this is huge. And a way to think about that is, all of the different innovations that we never thought much about 5 or 10 years ago, it could even be possible that we think of as commonplace today. I mean, if someone had told me that 2 of the most valuable private companies in the world were based on business models of things my mother told me to never do, don't get in the backseat of a stranger's car, and don't sleep at a stranger's house, I think that people would think you're crazy, but that's actually what happens all the time now. So, in thinking about kind of how we talk to other people about how we invest in this space and how we encourage other people to invest in this space, it really is about, number one, you need a unique vantage point. And for us, it's the fact that, we've been working in this space now for 4 years. And the fact that we understand how this works cross-border. We've worked with the World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank and other organizations to help build these sorts of regulatory and policy infrastructures to allow this to take place. We also have created the crowdfundomics equation, which is allowing us to have predictive outcomes in understanding how people are raising money and those factors that make a campaign more successful and those factors in a campaign that can make you less successful. Second, how are you adding value in this proposition? How are you enabling crowdfunding platforms and other FinTech companies to become successful? And as an investor, you've got to have a value add, because there are a lot of people that can write checks, but what the last thing you want as an entrepreneur is someone who writes a check and goes away. Because that's not a value add to you as an early stage founder. I was just meeting with a client yesterday who was talking about the fact that they didn't want angel money from where they are located. They wanted to have VCs or some other type of an investor who understood the market, who understood how to connect them with other people in the ecosystem. That's a very important thing. And then third, you need guts and conviction. And, because I meet with investors all the time who say, oh, yes, we're an early stage investor in technology. And I say, oh, really? Tell me what that early stage to you means. Well, we like to write, $5 to $10 million checks. Well, most early stage companies, are looking for $100,000, $500,000, $1 million. And they're looking, and these early stage investors are actually late stage investors who are pretending to be early stage investors. And so, I think that as entrepreneurs, be careful of that. And talking who you're talking to and understanding, are they really early stage investors? Are they really willing to take risk? Do they have the courage of their convictions? Are they going to support you through the tough times? Those are the kinds of things you have to look for. Now, so anyway, I think that we're really in the first phase of this modern capital development. And that we really think that there's going to be new kinds of business models as well as new products created. And the opportunity to take successful business models from country A and put them into country B is a really, really interesting opportunity. So, fundamentally, we think that we're on page, 87 of a 1,000-page novel. We're getting started, but there's a lot of activity so far. There's a lot of great foundational elements that have been built. We think that the market potential with $4.7 trillion on the table leads a lot of opportunities. And I think that, as entrepreneurs, one of the things I would encourage you to think about, in a lot of the countries we work in, we help to set up crowdfunding trade associations, because we think that's a really effective way of interfacing with the government and the regulator in those countries. Because governments and regulators tend to want to engage with one entity that represents a whole industry. And so, thinking larger about this as opposed to thinking small is really important. Because as a founder of a crowdfunding platform or a FinTech company of some kind, be collaborative with your competition. Because the bottom line is the biggest competition you have at this point in market development is apathy and lack of knowledge. And so if you can work together to build a stable foundation for your ecosystem and a stable foundation for crowdfunding and modern finance, then you will have that opportunity. So, bottom line, we see crowdfunding and the tools that are being created here as the beginning of the biggest innovations that we've seen in the private capital markets in probably 50 years. I mean, the way private equity transactions and VC investments and many times angel investments, the way those processes occur today really haven't changed in decades. And while it was also kind of funny that those are the exact industries that have funded the disruption of virtually every other industry in the world. And so now we're looking for that disruption to move back to the private capital markets and really take hold. Do I think that banks are going to evaporate or go out of business? No, I don't. I think the lazy ones will. I think the dumb ones will. But by and large, I think most banks are figuring it out. Most banks are learning what these new markets are going to have. They're learning how these new models are going to develop, and they'll acquire the successful models and continue to succeed. But I think that in the meantime, there's a tremendous opportunity for the entrepreneurs that are the majority of this audience to build really, really interesting technology that can help accelerate the growth of access to capital globally. So thank you very much.